It is the Makara Sankramam Eve, the eve of transition from the better to the best. Welcome once again to News Analysis. News Analysis, a weekly magazine on current affairs. To begin with the main points in a nutshell. Behind Tunisia unrest, rage over wealth of ruling family. Clinton bluntly presses Arab leaders on reform. Death toll mounts in Brazilian deluge. Afghan Taliban and opposition to educating girls. Mamta Squadre, 26 Pakistan's governor's bodyguard and killer, now a hero to many Pakistanis. Indian Prime Minister unveils steps to curb food price inflation. And now the news in detail. Behind Tunisia, unrest rage over wealth of ruling family. This ancient Mediterranean hamlet, advertised as the Tunisian Saint-Tropez, has long been favorite summer getaway of President Zain Al Abidine Ben Ali and his large extended family, many of whom have built vast beachfront mansions here with the wealth they have amassed during years in power. But their new and conspicuous riches, partly exposed in a detailed cable by the American ambassador and made public by WikiLeaks, have fueled an extraordinary extended uprising by Tunisians who blame corruption among the elite for the joblessness afflicting their country. And on Thursday, idyllic Hammamet became the latest casualty of the rage as hundreds of protesters swarmed the streets. The police fled and rioters gleefully ransacked the mansion of a presidential relative, liberating a horse from its stable and setting aflame a pair of all-terrain luxury vehicles. That outburst was just a chapter in the deadly violence that flared around the country and in Tunis, the capital, again on Thursday, making the government appear increasingly shaky. The mounting protests threatened not only to overturn a close United States ally in the fight against terrorism, but also to pull back the veneer of tranquil stability that draws legions of Western tourists to Tunisia's coastal resorts. President Ben Ali gave a hastily scheduled televised address on Thursday night, his second in the past week, and this time he appeared rattled. He no longer blamed foreign terrorists or vowed to crack down on protesters. Instead, he pledged to give in to many of the protesters' demands, including an end to the government's notoriously tight censorship, but rejecting calls for an immediate end to its 23-year rule. "I'm telling you, I understand you. Yes, I understand you," Mr. Ben Ali, 74, declared. "And I decided total freedom for the media with all its channels and no shutting down internet sites and rejecting any form of monitoring of it." And he repeated a pledge he first made when he seized power in a bloodless coup: not presidency for life. He vowed not to challenge the constitutional age limit of 75 for presidents, which would make him ineligible to seek re-election in 2014. The immediate response to the speech appeared mixed. In at least one neighborhood of the capital, grateful Tunisians could be heard in the streets ignoring an 8 p.m. curfew order, cheering the president, but others said his words meant little. These are the same promises he made last week, that he made a few years ago, that he made in 1987, but on the ground it's always the same, one person said, declining to be identified for fear of reprisals. Just as in other protests in recent days, the demonstrators called for President Ben Ali to step down. But many seemed even more angry at his second wife, Hilary Rodham, and her family. "No, no to the Trabelsis who looted the budget" has been the popular slogan, and some said they still consider the president a good man brought down by the greed of his wife and her clan. Many refer to the president's extended relations simply as the family or the mafia. Let's wait and see what happens in Tunisia now.
تونسيين وتونسيات أكلمكم الآن لأن الوضع تغيير، نعم تغيير شامل، وأنا فهمتكم. نعم أنا فهمتكم وفهمت الجميع، البطال والمحتاج والسياسي واللي طالب مزيد من الحريات، فهمتكم وفهمت الكل. لكن الأحداث التي جارية اليوم في بلادنا ما هيش متاعنا، والتخريب عادات التونسي المتحضر، التونسي المتسامح.
They were organic. It's a social burst against the failures of the government in place, which is claiming that it got more than 5% increase in GDP each year, and that it's claiming that it's a paradise. But this solid development and these solid gains in terms of the economy, where are
Clinton bluntly presses Arab leaders on reform. Secretary of State Hilary Rodham Clinton delivered a scalding critique of Arab leaders on Thursday, saying their countries risk sinking into the sand of unrest and extremism unless they liberalize their political system and cleaned up their economies. Speaking at a conference in this gleaming Persian Gulf Emirate, Mrs. Clinton recited a familiar litany of ills: corruption, repression, and lack of rights for women and religious minorities. But her remarks were still striking for their vehemence, and they suggested a frustration that Obama administration message to the Arab world had not gotten through. In too many places, in too many ways, the region's foundations are sinking into the sand, she said to a stone-faced audience of foreign ministers, business people, and rights groups. The new and dynamic Middle East that I have seen needs firmer ground if it is to take root and grow everywhere. Mrs. Clinton's remarks were delivered at the end of an intense 4-day tour of the Persian Gulf that took her from impoverished autocratic Yemen to the prosperous, comparatively open Sultanate of Oman. She also stopped in Abu Dhabi and Dubai before finishing in Qatar, a wealthy fief still exulting in its selection as the site of the World Cup soccer tournament in 2022. As Mrs. Clinton delivered her critique, events echoed loudly in the background. Unrest in Tunisia that threatened its government while serving to buttress her arguments, and developing political crisis in Lebanon that illustrated both the range and the limits of American influence in the region. The United States has little leverage over the pivotal players in Lebanon, notably the militant group Hezbollah, whose ministers walked out of the coalition government in Beirut on Wednesday, forcing its collapse. While Mrs. Clinton applauded signs of progress in Qatar and elsewhere, it was Yemen with its crippled economy and creeping subculture of Islamic terrorism that seemed to stick in her mind. A day after her visit Tuesday, the Yemeni government announced that for security reasons, citizens would need permits to visit foreign embassies, according to the official news agency, Sabah. Mrs. Clinton had met opposition figures at the American embassy in the capital, Sana'a. Those who cling to the status quo may be able to hold back the full impact of their country's problems for a little while, but not forever. Mrs. Clinton said if leaders don't offer a positive vision and give young people meaningful ways to contribute, others will fill the vacuum. Mrs. Clinton saved her most scathing remarks for corruption, which she said was corroding Arab economies and making life impossible for foreigners who ran businesses in Arab countries. Trying to get a permit, she said, you have to pass money through so many different hands. Trying to open up, you have to pay people off. Trying to stay open, you have to pay people off. Trying to export your goods, you have to pay people off. So by the time you pay everybody off, it's not a very profitable venture. Mrs. Clinton's audience listened silently, though the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, calmly defended his country's record. Bahrain is much more open than a decade ago, he said, with a major growth in advocacy groups and labor unions. Even when Mrs. Clinton was pressed on why the Obama administration tolerated Israel's expansion of settlements in the West Bank, an issue that wrangles through the Arab world and has contributed to a breakdown of the Middle East peace process, she pushed back. Can these speeches better the WikiLeaks tarnished America's global image? Death toll mounts in Brazilian deluge. Dozens of people lined up outside an elementary school on Thursday, clutching family members under one umbrella as they braced themselves for news about their loved ones feared lost in devastating landslides and have produced Brazil's most deadly natural disaster. As flatbed trucks arrived with bodies covered in black plastic, Maria Meirelles emerged sobbing from the makeshift morgue, but still uncertain about the fate of her brother, a sister, and 4 other family members. Rains early Wednesday morning ripped through the hillside neighborhood of Campo de Salho, where Mrs. Meirelles' relatives lived, she said. The Rio State Civil Defense Department said scores of people were still missing and more than 6,000 were left homeless. Residents of the 3 hardest hit towns worried about how long many other houses could cling to collapsing hillsides. This year, the states of Rio and Sao Paulo have been hardest hit, with 21 people dying in Sao Paulo this month from flooding and landslides. Rio officials said that the rains in the mountain towns were more devastating than the damage caused by rain in 1967 in the city of Rio, which had previously been the worst rain-related event on record.